Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. So please grab a seat. Don't be shy to grab one up front. Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Frost. I'm curatorial assistant here at BAM-PFA and worked on this wonderful show of Hannah's. Thank you so much for being here. We're very excited to be celebrating the opening of Hannah Levy, Matrix 279, with this conversation between Hannah Levy and Rhonda Holberton. Before diving into introductions, I wanted to thank my colleagues here at BAM-PFA, whose work has been crucial to the organization of this show, and also Veronica Levitt, director at Casey Kaplan, for her support of this project. So now to the main event. With great joy, I would like to welcome Hannah Levy. Hannah lives and works in New York. She received a BFA from Cornell University and an MA at Stadelschule, Frankfurt am Main, Germany. Levy's work has been presented at institutions nationally and internationally, including the Arts Club of Chicago, the 59th Venice Biennale, the High Line New York, MoMA PS, and MoMA PS1. Levy is slated to participate in the 16th Lyon Biennial of Contemporary Art in France in the fall of this year. Levy's uncanny configurations evoke the ways in which we fetishize objects, spaces, and the bodies that utilize them. As you may or may not know, this exhibition has been in the works since late 2019, so we're thrilled to have such a beautiful exhibition of her work in our galleries, including a brand new work in which she has used slumped glass for the first time. I am also pleased to welcome artist and professor Rhonda Holberton, who will be in conversation with Hannah tonight. Holberton lives and works in Oakland. She received an MFA from Stanford University and a BFA from California College of the Arts. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally and is currently on view as part of the exhibition's Speculative Portraits at SFMOMA and MYR at the McAvoy Foundation for the Arts, both of which I very much encourage you to check out. Holberton is currently assistant professor of digital media at San José State University. Rhonda's explorations of materiality and the body and her use of digital and interactive technologies integrated into traditional methods of art production, I hope will create room for a deeper understanding of Hannah's work. Please join me in welcoming Hannah Levy and Rhonda Holberton.
So the way that we decided to do this was we're just going to be showing work of mine from the last 2 years kind of on loop because I haven't really shown on the West Coast before, so I imagine this is new for most of you. So I thought it would be a nice way to kind of introduce things. They're in chronological order, but because they're looping, it'll be hard to tell.
We talk a little bit, and maybe, refer to the slides too as it's looping, how you construct these pieces, and talk a little bit about the materials that you use.
So most of the work in the gallery on view and that you're kind of seeing in the slideshow is made from polished nickel-plated steel and cast silicone. There's also some stone, marble, and upstairs in the gallery, there's also a glass work.
Talk a little bit about the way that you use these rods and the claws. There's lots of different ways that this kind of animus could come through in the work. What is it about the kind of claw form that keeps coming back? Is it a product of the linear material? Is it something that can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a product of a few different things. I got to the claw form originally because I do look at these design tropes so much, and the kind of like standard clawfoot furniture, clawfoot tub is something I was thinking about. There's like the like Cocteau film of like Beauty and the Beast, where like these arms are coming out of the walls, like holding these like candelabras, which is just like an image that I've never been able to get out of my head. So that's kind of where the claws originated. But then also, because I am fabricating all the work myself, I am always trying to get around like ways of giving metal like real gesture and character without needing to cast steel, because it's such a cost prohibitive process. So I've found that through the claws, I'm able to kind of weld and carve the steel to get these forms. And it allows me to get this like really organic form that gives the work a character and gesture without resorting to such a cost prohibitive process.
Right, right. So these forms, and I think, you know, I love that you referenced like that particular Beauty and the Beast rendition, although it kind of comes up in a lot of more, you know, more common kind of animated films.
Totally.
And one, yeah.
Or the animated Beauty and the Beast, it's probably in 2, but I don't remember it exactly.
Yeah. So there's something, I think, that there's a precedent for the human desire to kind of anthropomorphize the furniture that we kind of live amongst. And one of the things that your work kind of makes me think about is that it's kind of, you're working with scale in a really playful way. So that human size scale, like both that I can imagine kind of interacting with the piece or what it might feel like, but you also do these kind of pushes and pulls with scale that are like slightly off. You know, like I've seen works of yours that are kind of chair-like that are slightly too small. The chandelier kind of feeling like slightly too big. There's an image that you can see cycling through of your work, the retainer piece on the High Line, which I think does something else I want to come back to. But will you talk a little bit about scale and why you want us to relate to, like, why do you want us to know what it feels like to kind of feel the work or be in proximity to it?
Yeah. So I think, you know, ideally you see artwork in person if you can. So the fact that some of these are a different scale than they might appear in images is often something that like surprises people if they've seen images and then they're seeing the real thing for the first time. But you know, play with scale is kind of one of the like most basic like sculptural tools to get to like the uncanny. Yeah. So part of it is that. A lot of the chairs that I've made are 3/4 scale, which is a size I like a lot because it's not a size furniture that's so familiar. Like if you look at like a kindergarten classroom, it's much smaller than 3/4 scale. But then if you look at like a 5th grade classroom, it's just full adult size. So it's this size where like we don't commonly see furniture made for that size. And even like when you see it in person, it's not exactly clear when you first see it that it's 3/4 scale. It's just clear that it is not quite going to hold or fit you. And so ideally with my work in general, I think looking at it would create these moments of kind of like tension, which could create some kind of like bodily awareness or like discomfort in theory. And that feeling of knowing how something is pushed or pulled or knowing how you would interact with a certain thing or the idea that you wouldn't quite fit into it is something I like to play with.
Will you talk also to kind of follow up on that and maybe move us into another direction? Your interest in design and where that came from. Was that something that you grew up studying or?
Yeah, it's something I've been into kind of forever. I mean, on a really basic level, the idea of making sculptures that are furniture-like makes sense to me because the objects that we're used to interacting with and having like our bodies touch and be in contact with the most, it's furniture. So that logically felt like a good starting point to me, like transitionally. I also like, I grew up with like an architect mom and I like collected books on chairs as a little kid and I've just been into it forever. Yeah.
And do you think like, so kind of design was in the family and you amongst kind of growing up. Did you talk a little bit in some of your other interviews about modernist design in particular, and I wouldn't necessarily call your work, you know, it's in conversation, but you have a little bit of like a Gothic Baroque going on too. Do you want to, where did that kind of come through and like through what lenses are you kind of thinking about modernism and how are you playing with it?
Well, I'm not going to pretend I'm a design scholar necessarily, but for the amount that I kind of have learned and read about modernism over the years, which really my kind of interest in that design specifically came more out of like convenience and practicality and observation than any kind of like really knowledgeable place, at least in the beginning. You know, these architects who were kind of the head of that movement really wanted to make objects that were like easily made in these kind of specific types of working that were newly accessible at the time. So it was easy for me to make these like very simple bends in steel. And kind of as my, you know, just physical abilities as like a maker have improved, I've been able to get more of these kind of like, as you said, like rococo moments or whatever. They also, like, in learning more about modernist design, like they were really looking a lot at Art Nouveau designers. And so it's been fun to me to kind of take the like polished surfaces and like similar material and kind of look back and focus more on those forms. Like the some of the stilts in there are kind of like take some of the influences of the curves in their structure from these like Hector Guimard like stools and things like that. So there's just like there's a couple people who like just I've clung on to and like to reference because I am an admirer of their work, basically.
And we had a conversation before this, and where we were kind of talking about the differences in like acceptable terminology for movements or trends. You know, what a trend might be in fashion. Like, is there a corollary in like the art context? And of course there is. We call them, you know, periods. They're a little bit slower, but I think because we're all online and we're looking at artwork, we're starting to either kind of be able to see kind of the international trend, but then also we're also able to kind of identify what's in good taste, right? Or what's in bad taste, or what's kind of, you know, what are the new trends this season at the fairs or something, right? So are you interested, you know, in playing with that? And specifically, I'm thinking, you know, the chandelier works that you've kind of talked about, and then the shoes or the kind of wearables.
Yeah, I think there are kind of two ways to look at that, and I'll try both. But so there are these kind of like trends in the art world, whether we want to like always admit it or not, and they probably are coming faster than they have. I'm not so interested in commenting on that specifically, but I do like the idea, and I've accepted the idea of making work that is like very much a product of like my time and the age I am at this time and what I'm looking at. So like, for instance, like most of the kind of sandals that are atop the stilts in the show are like modeled off of shoes that are from like 2021 collections. And the idea of like this like square toe that's like very of the moment, like this season, last season, and like the specific like type of strappy sandal, like being able to look back at it 5 years from now and being like, that's very 2021, like is fine with me. But it because like trying to circumvent that like doesn't make sense. And part of why I like making objects is that they are such a product of their time that they can like kind of comment on the cultural production that we're making in general. So why not like really lean into that? I also at one point did a video with like these iPod headphones, and it was like a cast of the like specific plastic case that they had at the time. It's now, they don't have that kind of case anymore. And even as I was making it, I knew that that was a thing that would change, and kind of the way that, unfortunately, it's not in this slide, but in the way that I'm like playing with it in the video and the way that it's filmed kind of references the like swipey like iPhone commercials that were taken from like straight up looking down on like a white background and like a very specific like 2008 to like 14 era. that don't really exist anymore. So it's something I've been kind of playing with consciously or subconsciously for a while, just because the things that exist in our world are so temporal and trend-based. And then the second thing that you kind of mentioned was something I've talked about in the context of the chandeliers and a lot of the other objects I look at. I like to kind of find forms and play with forms in my sculptures that have like a specific cultural context, and maybe a specific cultural context that like has shifted or can be seen in two different ways. So the chandelier is a form I played with a lot recently, and I like focusing on those in particular because there is this kind of like very ornate chandelier model that was at one time like really a sign of like high taste or high class, and is now considered kind of like cheesy and like lower brow. Like it might be something that you pick up in like a Home Depot rather than something that is like a very high value and like in like a more like high class, high value setting. Like you might see just like a single pendant, like light fixture. So it's this object that like, depending on how old it is, like when it was made, where it's shown, you can kind of tell if this is an object with like high or low status, and how those same forms, depending on what year they're made and where they're shown, will have this different cultural connotation, is something I like to play with in a lot of different things, but the chandelier is one example of that.
And I think that kind of tension that you allude to, there's frequently in your work, I mean, the objects are these combinations, these kind of queer objects or combinations of references, but they're the humor in them that I kind of alluded to operates in a way that kind of is playing with those binaries, high, low, soft, material or kind of rigid material. Scale in a way, or like inside and outside. And I think the scale with the retainer piece, the large marble, I want to ask a question about that, but I want you to describe it for people who might not have caught it on the cycle.
So it'll come around one time. There we go.
There. Perfect timing. Wonderful.
Yeah. And I wanted a photo with people in it for this so you could see how big it is. Yeah. But so am I talking about this?
Yeah, we don't need to necessarily describe it in the same way. So I'm thinking about the forms that you use that kind of adopt like a rectilinear piece with a skin-like form. So chairs, or in the case of the retainer, right? It's a retainer object. And most of the objects that you're using kind of sit adjacent to or outside the body, but this is one, or tent structures, which we can talk about too, where the body kind of goes inside of it. But the retainer is an object that's kind of meant to shift a structural piece of our own bodies. It's also one of the kind of body adjacent works that's not necessarily gendered, which we can talk about maybe if you're interested in later. But the scale of the retainer piece is kind of inverting that interior and exterior in the way that the body engages with it. And that's part of its humor, right? Is that kind of translation of scale and the way that a body would approach it. Some of your other pieces, I think, start hinting. Well, would you want to talk a little bit about why it's important that your pieces are funny? Because they're also, there's a darkness too in them. And I think that you're playing a lot. Yeah, go. Why don't you go?
Yeah, sure. Well, the retainer piece specifically is a little bit different from what I normally do, which is kind of find like multiple reference points and kind of bring them together to make one sculpture. Whereas the retainer really is like it starts as like a found object that I then changed the scale of. And I really liked the retainer as a form because it was kind of like a natural or already existing example of this thing that I often play with, which is this kind of like cast organic form, like on this like specifically like curved metal structure. So the retainer is like an example of that kind of existing in culture already. But then I also kind of, it holds this kind of like complicated position in that like access to like orthodonture, especially in the US, like, and whether someone has braces at an older age or younger age, like, is this kind of like silent code that people like see in each other and like isn't really talked about, and is like this, it's in the same way that like the kind of chandelier indicates some like subtle thing that like we all know about like class and culture and society. The retainer as a form also operates in a similar way to me. And then beyond that, it is such a sculptural tool that it's like, it's doing something like literally sculptural to the body, and that it's molding it and forming it, and that like movement, like translating that into a sculpture just has this like funny logic that makes sense to me. And so then beyond that, bringing it to the High Line, making it in marble, this like very like rarefied material, and essentially turning it into a park bench was something that I wanted to do. You know, it is at the end of the day just kind of funny to sit on this thing, and it was something you were able to sit on the High Line. And you know, that you walk into like, it's kind of like a goofy thing, like the like classic like design store, like soy sauce, like corn, like thing that you sit on. Like I like to kind of bring it back there. Like I'm interested in like this like more complicated position that like the retainer in society takes, but at the end of the day, it's just like this kind of dumb thing that you get to sit on also.
Yeah. So I think for the viewers, you know, you can experience the work, all of Hannah's work, on a very formal kind of surface level way, appreciating what you're looking at. But I think that the more that you dig into it, you kind of get to the humorous layer, and then behind the humor, and the way that humor, you know, functions generally is that it is a pressure valve for things that are uncomfortable, right? That's part of why we like humor and why it exists for our culture.
Or it's an access point.
Exactly. So you come at it kind of from the side. And I think, you know, art in general can get at complicated or unspeakable things because it's a visual form. Some of the tensions that you kind of alluded to, like the control of the body, either like in the mouth, this restructuring, or like when people sit on it, they're kind of quite literally reconfiguring their structural form. It's more of a skeletal reconstruction. And some of the pieces where it's a softer reconstruction, I'm thinking like corsets or like bras, these kind of forms that have both skin and wire form, are more about kind of modifying, not necessarily, like also for kind of pleasure and for visual code, but it's also very gendered. Is that, and the shoes too, when you're working on it, like working with these kind of high heels, it's this exaggerated kind of reposturing of the female body. Is that something that is interesting in to you, or is it like just generally the forms that kind of come through in the way that you're thinking about materials?
It's not uninteresting to me, but it's not necessarily the thing that I'm focusing on when I choose to work in those forms. It's more that like I outside of like the work that I make, like it's the fashion that I'm consuming more than other things. But also I think it's kind of what we look at women's clothing generally more than men's as a society. So it's not even such a gendered choice to me as it is just like looking at current trends and like playing with them in a certain way. Some pieces, you know, like the stilts specifically, obviously reference high heels, which is, you know, generally a female thing. But my specific interest in the heel, like, yes, on a basic level, there is something kind of like funny and comical by the fact that like almost half the population like will sometimes like stand on these things that like makes it really like hard to walk, and like this is like an exaggerated moment of that. To me, it was more about kind of the idea of like a claw on the ground and like this stilt as like a proposition, and like being able to imagine like just how hard that would be to walk on. I also originally showed them, and a lot of the work in this show, at the Arts Club in Chicago, which has this like really specific polished marble floor. So I liked that, you know, like when you watch like a little dog like run across like a marble floor, it makes that like crazy noise, and then they like skitter at the end, so like just like these like moments of like tension that like are like coded in our memories, just like kind of playing with those things is more usually where that stuff comes from than like a specific interest in like female fashion forms, but it is also that.
Yeah, I'm thinking a little bit about like these soft codes, and so maybe it's female fashion forms, or it's kind of some sort of structural modification to the body for some, again, a soft cultural code, and who restructures their body and how and why. And I think that kind of relates to some of the darkness in your work and the humor as well. One of the things that the more I think about your work, and specifically this kind of tension between structure and skin, are these forces, these kind of cultural forces that we've all engaged with. You referenced Beauty and the Beast. I sent to you this animation an early animation from Disney of 1929, where it's like the skeleton dance. You might all have seen it, but the skeletons become very soft and warbly, and there's kind of like it's scary, but also kind of funny when regular objects kind of become soft and then reach out like of the wall, right? And I'm wondering about these kind of the way that we digest visual information for kids, and the way that this kind of high-low that you talk about in the chandelier functions to create kind of that soft cultural milieu, right? Like what is a fashion trend, and why does it work, right? Why do we all care or agree on like what is in trend? And I think there's a lot of indicators that go into that, largely subconscious. And I don't want to get into like theory, but there's this kind of framework in capitalism and schizophrenia, the body without organs. And it came about as Felix Guattari and Guy Deleuze, and they are appropriating this model from Artaud to think about the kind of collective subconscious and the tensions in our kind of psychology, and that the organs in our body are the kind of limiting factors for processing the kind of internalized horrors of the world and the stresses of the world, and that to have a body without organs is kind of this freeing agency. Mm-hmm. And I think now, as like a media theorist, I think about body without organs, and it feels like this like absolute virtualized body. There is no friction, there is no kind of inside, mm-hmm. and you've kind of flayed the body, right? You're giving us skin, you're giving us bones, but the kind of inside is withheld or withdrawn. Some of the works, I think the Peach Pit kind of gets in between the skeletal and the skin. And the new work with glass also does that a little bit. Is what I'm saying resonate with you? And do you think about these kind of in-between moments that like might sit between the skin and the skeletal structures in your work?
I'm not exactly sure. Basically, when I think of kind of the way that I think of my work having to do with the body has to do more specifically with the kind of like anxiety of having a body, and like how vulnerable like we are as these like weird like sacks of flesh like walking around, and like the kind of knowable feeling of like one substance touching the other, and then like everything that could go wrong at any moment. Like there is kind of like when the body is referenced to me, it is like a little bit darker because there is so much like anxiety wrapped up in the experience of having a body, I think. And I also, it's when you were talking about kind of these like gendered forms earlier, it is this kind of thing that often comes up in my work. I think obviously when I'm using high heels, it comes up for different reasons, but has previously. And, I can't really tell if it's just because I make them, or if it's because like we've assigned this kind of like bodily awareness or like bodily anxiety as something that is like gendered female, which is something like very funny and like almost frustrating to me because it seems, as far as I can tell, pretty universal, but I don't know.
Right. But it's again those kind of soft like cultural codes and expectations, right? Like the anxiety of having a body, like just being that kind of thin stripe in which we can survive. You know, I just came from the East Coast, which I know that you were working like welding in during this amazing heat wave. And I was thinking about your work and kind of preparing for this while also like barely able to think and just like sweating. And it's just so aware of this vulnerable sack of, flesh walking around. Do you think that some of the pieces, maybe the tent piece, kind of as a structure, it's playing in ways that the retainer plays with skin and the materials that you use, but it also is especially here in the Bay Area, it's also a structure that comes in with a lot of loaded content. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk a little bit about like the tent and what it means, both like culturally, but also as like an additional protective agent for the body?
Yeah, so I was thinking of the tent structure less as a protective agent for the body and more kind of in the way that you were suggesting earlier, that it, kind of like the chandelier, like the retainer, different usage of a tent, or like you can just kind of glance at a tent and figure out like what's going on there. Like, is it this like pleasure activity that's like a leisure thing? Is it this like thing that's like a last resort thing that exists because of some like larger cultural failure? So that is kind of like interesting to me, again, that it's this thing that we all know and don't necessarily like acknowledge about like which kind of tent you're looking at. You can tell like it's a snap judgment. But then also, I think I mentioned it earlier, but usually when I start making a sculpture, I'm not looking at one object in particular. I'm usually looking at 2 or 3 and trying to figure out a way to like combine these forms into one thing. So with the tent, I was also specifically the 2 tents I've made. So one is here, one is in Venice. They're very different scales in person, but it's hard to see that in images. But they're both designed from like the architecture of a bat's wing. I was like, I think again in this like, it's not really what it's about, but in this like 2020 moment, I was like looking at bats more because we all were. And then like got really into the way that their wings work, just like structurally. They're the only like winged animal that has like a flesh wing. Like the closest thing after that is like a flying squirrel, and those aren't like a flappable wing in the same way. So the idea of this like tight, taut flesh over these like spindly kind of elegant bones coming about naturally, kind of in the same way as like the retainer is like a found thing that exists in the same way that my sculptures already did, was something exciting to me, and I wanted to use as like a sculptural like jumping off point. But I wasn't necessarily thinking of the tent so much as like an exoskeleton in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. It's like, because it's something we all kind of crawl inside, this like seconds, like a skin on top of a skin, or like what is this kind of permeable membrane that becomes both protective but also kind of a collector, like for our things. So we're gonna get close to, I think, to like a Q&A period, but before I open up Q&A, I have more questions that I can ask if there are no questions from the audience. But I also wanted to ask you, like, was there something that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to in this conversation that you think would be important to know while people look and read your work?
Not really off the top of my head, but maybe as questions come in, if they come in, I can reference some other things.
Okay, great. Anybody have questions for Hannah?
Hi, can you hear me? Hello, hi. I was curious about you saying that you fabricate your work yourself, and was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about that, like how you got started or what your studio's like. You're making really refined, really beautiful work, and I imagine that probably took years of practice.
Yeah, so I fabricate the work myself. I guess that is kind of inherently related to how the sculptures end up in a way, but it's not how I personally kind of think about them. But it's mostly just like a thing that I do out of practicality and necessity. Like I can't, like, getting things fabricated is like really expensive. And so I learned how to do the things that I want to do for the most part. I also really like working in metal, and metal specifically is an easier material, at least for me, to work in than other things. Like when I start a piece, I'm not starting from like a really like a blueprint drawing of something. I can kind of start by like bringing like 3 different like printout images like from my desktop to like my metal shop, and just like kind of start going and like bend things as they see fit. And if I get to the end and like there's like a 1-inch gap, I can just like fill it with the same material I made the thing with. Whereas like if you're working in wood or something else, that's like really a challenge at the end. So there's a lot of just like very practical reasons. I also don't like relying on other people for things in general, but also like it's really nice to me to be relatively self-sufficient, you know, as my work kind of expands and there's more like occasion to make more things. I'm having to let go of some of that, and that's happening now. The glass piece that's in the show, I wasn't able to make myself. I was working with a fabricator, and that comes with its whole other set of like issues and problem solving. But yeah, I mean, my metal skills have definitely gotten better. It's just a matter of like time and practice and patience. And I have an assistant who helps me sand now too. That's been really great. Yeah.
Hey, fun to get to see your work in person and want to see more of it. I mainly was curious about if you could speak to, there's some food elements in your work, and it feels a little bit different than the fleshy bodies that have been discussed otherwise, and I'm just curious thoughts about that.
Yeah, totally. That's a good thing that we forgot to mention. So there's a couple different kind of food elements in my work, but there's also some that I kind of come back to again and again. The one I've come back to the most is like asparagus, which I have been working with since college, actually. And I really like working with that form in particular in these like different kind of colors and like levels of like rigidity, because it is so like bodily. Like it looks like a bodily appendage, but it's not exactly the right size for what you like might be associating it with. Beyond that, there's also the kind of added element that like asparagus, at least for most of the population, like makes your pee smell weird. So it has this kind of like alien after effect on the body, which is like this weird, again, kind of untalked about like element to this thing that we're all consuming. And then it also is like a nice form and has this kind of like rich history and like still life painting and stuff. So it's been fun for me to play with that for a long time now. I started kind of casting it in like 1-to-1 scale and have like scaled them up since then, and working with these kind of food elements in different sizes is also something I've done pretty regularly. food in general, like, as I was saying, I think about like the body and this like anxiety and consuming. I think that obviously plays a big part in like anyone's relationship with food in general. So there's this thing that we consume that has a strange effect on the body. And then beyond that, I like to, because it starts as this like appendage size kind of thing, when I've scaled it up, I like to keep it in sizes that like relate to the body in funny ways. So I have one that's like arm size. I have another that's just like full body size. It's actually 8 feet, but like when it's curved, it ends up being 6 feet always. But yeah. Other foods I've used too, like we might be about to see an image of it. Oh no. In Venice right now, I have a peach pit that's carved in marble. That was like a fun thing for me to work with. I've been like trying to figure out a way to work with like a peach pit for a really long time. For a lot of reasons, like the most basic being that they are this like really crazy shape and texture, and when you play with the scale of them and specifically the color, they can end up getting like really organ-like or brainy like super quickly. Beyond that, peach pits like have cyanide in them, and so if you eat like 10 you can die, which is just like this like, weird, again, kind of like unspoken tension of like this thing that like you've like sucked on before has like a little piece of poison in it that like can kill you, is just kind of like this, again, kind of underlying tension or like creepiness to the thing that I like to play with. And then specifically in the case of the piece in Venice, it is also a chair. Unfortunately, you're not allowed to sit in it in the biennial. But
would you, wait, before you move on, would you want people to be able to sit in it in an ideal world, or is it more about that visual kind of projection of the body knowing it? Sorry to interrupt.
No. I think you could, in an ideal world, sit on it. Yeah. Okay. But it's just not practical in such a big show. Yeah. So there is this, like, again, layer of, like, kind of this, like, goofy, like, I'm sitting on, like, a giant marble peach pit thing.
Yeah. With a little bit of poison in it. It's funny with a little bit of poison.
Yeah. And it's, like, this bodily, strange shape. Like, it actually, when I was, like, there, it was kind of funny to hear other people like not know what it was, because it is something that I assume everyone in that room has like spent a good deal of time with, but in like such a different color and context, it's hard to know. And then kind of the last layer of why I've wanted to work with peach pits forever and felt like marble was like the right material is that there's like an ancient Chinese tradition of like carving little tiny sculptures out of peach pits. They have some in the Met actually. And it's like we don't really have that in Western culture. Like you can sometimes get like a peach pit ring at like a county fair, but it is, again, this like kind of high-low thing. And I liked the idea of like A, bringing it to Venice, and B, making it in marble. So it is kind of like the ultimate like sculptural like material and object in that context.
Can I follow up a little bit on, so I think I mentioned, the peach pit and then like the walnut pieces and like to a certain extent the new glass piece being these kind of like organs that sit between these other forms that are so clearly in tension. The glass was a new process for you.
Yeah.
And out of all of the pieces, I think, the dynamic or the conversation between the glass and then the kind of armature holding it felt like this kind of like corrosive, gentle care, like this toxic love or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that has to do with, me projecting what I know about glass in the same way I can project what I know about silicone onto the other pieces. But there's also quite literally a gesture that's very different, right? You can't kind of stretch this thing over the armature.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the design of that?
Yeah, sure. So usually when I'm working with two materials, I like to think that they are acting in exactly the way that they look like they're acting. So if something looks like it's being kind of stretched, it is. If something looks like it's like sagging into a form, it is. So the process that this glass piece was made, it's called slumping. It's slumped glass, where basically it's what is often used to make like glass dishware and stuff. Like a stainless mold is put under a pane of glass in a kiln, and as it heats, it kind of sags and falls into place. So that's the process we used for this piece, which took a lot of trial and error, but I liked the idea of having that kind of like sag moment that happens in the silicone and the other materials that I use, but then having it kind of frozen in time. So even though it like looks like it's acted in the way it's acting because it also has like it's stopped. It is not doing this thing continually. So that was kind of an exciting thing for me to get to play with, and I'm hoping to use the process again for other things.
Awesome.
I was wondering if you could talk about how you gather inspiration, if you're always gathering it. Do you have like heroes and demons out there? Do you set time aside, or do you feel like you're always on the lookout and open? And where does your inspiration come from? Maybe.
Yeah, I guess kind of always, but then also like it is project specific to a certain degree. Like I guess I'm always kind of creating like some kind of like internal visual archive, and that like I'll take photos of like weird things I see and like put it in a specific album on my phone, or like my computer desktop is just like littered with like screenshots from wherever that I'll go through every now and then and be like, oh, I'm going to make something that's these three, and then just like print them out and bring it to the metal shop. So yes, I'm kind of always collecting these things, not even in a way that's like super conscious. It's just like what I've become in the habit of doing. And I think a lot of us do it, even if we're not visual producers. But then also when I have like a specific deadline or a specific show I'm working on, I will consciously kind of get into maybe the history of that space or the architecture of it, or just some kind of entry point to jump off from, or to situate the work in a different way.
And maybe like as a kind of final question here, unless anybody else comes up with one, you're talking about the kind of combination of three elements or more, or you like grab a few. Do you know like immediately when they kind of coalesce? And like what for you does this combination or these kind of hybrid forms, hybrid objects do?
Well, it's again kind of a sculptural strategy to get at the uncanny or something, and that it's like three I'm just using as like an off the top of my head example, but it's like these multiple recognizable forms combine to create something that is familiar but not altogether like knowable. So it's not always that I'm like, well, I guess I'll like put in a notebook like just like 3 words or 2 words, and then kind of get to my studio and print out whatever those things are. I rely a lot on a printer, and then kind of start working in the metal from there. So it's like I'm not so good at drawing, so it's more just like object to object rather than like a really planned thing, which is also what I was talking about with like why I like metal so much.
You're like drawing directly in the metal.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Hannah and Rhonda. This was just fascinating. I have even more questions.
Good.
But it was super illuminating. And thank you all for being here.